The last car at Raven Hollow. I have told this story in pieces for years. Usually when someone asks why I do not take night shifts anymore, but I have never said it exactly the way it happened. Even now, I still do not know what was waiting on the other side of that glass. At the time, I worked alone as the overnight toll attendant for Raven Hollow Bridge. It was a narrow suspension bridge that connected the highway to a cluster of small towns beyond the river valley. Most nights, I sat in a concrete booth with a coffee maker, a logbook, a radio, and a view of the bridge lights fading into fog. The work was simple. Take cash from the occasional trucker, log the plates, open the arm, press the button if anything looked wrong. I liked the job because it was quiet. No boss hovering over my shoulder. No one asking about the divorce I still could not talk about without sounding embarrassed. I was alone. And after everything that had happened that year, alone felt safer than company. There were only 3 things that ever made the job unpleasant: the cold, the wind, and the sound the bridge made when it was under strain. On quiet nights, you could hear the cables shift above the river like long metal breaths. Every now and then, a gust would roll through the valley, and the whole structure would tremble with a low, humming groan that you could feel in your teeth. I had worked there for almost 9 months, long enough to know every crack in the pavement, every dead bulb in the overhead lights, and every regular who passed through with exact change already held out in their hand. Nothing ever happened on that bridge. That was the whole point of the place. It was a way through, not a destination. The first strange thing happened just after 1 a.m. on a Tuesday that had already felt too still. I was flipping through the logbook when I noticed the little brass bowl next to the window. The one people tossed coins into when they were short on toll money. It was not a special bowl. It was just a dented old dish the previous attendant had brought in from home because he thought it made the booth feel less miserable. That night, though, I looked up and saw a strip of black thread tied neatly around its rim, not wrapped messily, not snagged there by accident, tied in a small bough. I touched it with one finger and realized it was damp, as if somebody had just handled it with wet hands. I checked the camera outside, expecting to see a mechanic or one of the morning crew messing around on the platform, but the feed showed nothing except the empty toll lane in my own face reflected in the glass. I told myself a driver had leaned in and dropped the thread without me noticing. It was small enough to dismiss, and I did dismiss it. Around 2:30, I started hearing the sound that made the rest of the night impossible to forget. At first, it came so faintly through the radio speaker that I thought there was some station bleed from the emergency channel. A woman's voice, low and exhausted, repeating my call sign in a tone so flat it barely sounded like speech. I picked up the handset and answered, but all I got was static and a click, like someone had put a finger on the microphone. I tried the dispatch line, then the maintenance line, then the supervisor's home number. Every time I heard the same thing in the background after the first ring. That same voice whispering my name with the patience of somebody standing right behind a door. The bridge was empty, no headlights, no engine noise, no reason for a radio to carry anything at all. Still, the voice kept drifting in and out. Sometimes it sounded close enough that I pulled the handset away from my ear. Sometimes it sounded so thin and far away, it might have been carried by the wind. When I finally looked out the window toward the far approach, I saw a shape standing in the middle of the far lane. It did not move when I stared at it. It did not wave. It did not come toward me. It just stood there in the dark with the bridge lights shining around it. When I blinked, it was gone. I locked the booth door without even remembering doing it. The next car I saw was not a car at all, but a gray maintenance truck crawling up from the south side with its hazard lights blinking. That should have calmed me down, but the driver did something odd as he rolled to my window. He did not look at me first. He looked at the chair behind me. Then he looked down at the black thread around the coin bowl and backed up a little too fast, as if he had seen something he did not want to acknowledge. I leaned out and asked whether he was okay, but he did not answer right away. He just stared past me into the booth and said, very quietly, "You need to keep the window closed tonight." I thought he was joking until he lifted 2 fingers and pointed at the reflective glass. At first, I only saw my own face in the window, pale under the fluorescent light. Then I noticed the shape beside me, not in the booth with me, in the reflection, standing where no one had room to stand. It was the outline of a person, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall. Its shoulders seemed to rise above the top of the chair. I spun around so fast I knocked the coffee mug into my lap. There was no one there. When I turned back, the maintenance truck was already pulling away from the curb, and the driver would not meet my eyes. He drove across the bridge without paying. After that, the night began to feel like it had separated from the rest of the world. The bridge no longer sounded like a bridge. It sounded like breathing beneath the roadway. Every so often, I would hear a soft drag on the pavement outside the booth window, as if someone were slowly walking the lane markers with the tip of a shoe. Once I saw a pair of headlights come onto the south approach, but instead of traveling toward me, they remained fixed in place for nearly a full minute, bright and unmoving, as though the vehicle had stopped where the road should have continued. I grabbed the binoculars and looked, but all I could make out was a shape larger than a car, darker than the fog around it. The headlights went out one at a time, not in the way a battery dies, but in the way a person closes their eyes. Then the bridge lights dimmed all at once, and I found myself sitting in near darkness with only the dashboard glow illuminating the toll lane. That was when the little black thread on the bowl began to move. It did not flap. It did not twitch like something caught in the air conditioner. It slowly tightened fiber by fiber until the bow became a knot, then a line, then a thin dark strand stretching across the counter as if an unseen hand were pulling it from the other side of the window. I stood up so quickly the chair scraped the floor behind me. A sound came from the glass. Not a knock, exactly. More like one fingernail dragged from top to bottom. The whole booth felt colder in an instant, and I could see my breath starting to cloud. Then the floodlight outside my window swung once, though there was no wind strong enough to move it. And for a single second, the far lane was filled with white brightness. I saw something standing beside the toll barrier. It had the shape of a person, but not the posture of one. Too rigid. Its head was angled in a way that made me think of somebody listening through a wall. I could not see its face clearly, but I remember the eyes. They were not glowing. They were wet, reflective in the wrong way. like the surface of water in a pit, and the thing kept looking not at me, but past me, toward the chair in the back corner, as if it expected someone else to be there. My first instinct was to run, but the booth door would not open. The lock turned halfway and stuck. I hit it with my palm, then my shoulder, then both hands, and the deadbolt would not move. The radio gave one sharp burst of static so loud I nearly dropped it. Under the static, I heard the woman's voice again. But this Chimi, it sounded less like someone speaking from far away, and more like someone breathing into a microphone on the other side of the glass. The voice said, "Do not let it in." Then the booth lights snapped off completely. For one impossible second, I was blind. In that dark, I heard the booth window slide an inch downward. Not enough to open it fully, just enough to let in a strip of air cold enough to burn my face. Something was pressed against the outside of the glass, close enough that I could hear a soft, wet sound with each breath. The smell came next. River water, rust, and something sour under it, like old pennies soaked too long in a jar. I backed into the wall and reached for the emergency flashlight under the desk. But before I could grab it, I heard a second sound from the lane outside. Scratching, slow, deliberate, scratching against the pavement, circling the booth. Then the voice came again, but this time it was not on the radio. It was right outside the window. It sounded like mine, not an imitation, not a trick of tone. My own voice, exhausted and shaking, saying, "Open up. You already let me in." I have never been able to describe the terror of that sentence without sounding ridiculous, because there is no way to explain what it feels like to hear yourself spoken from the dark by something that does not belong there. I finally found the flashlight and clicked it on with such force I broke the switch cover. The beam landed on the window, and for a half second I saw a face inches from the glass, not fully formed, but close enough to make out the shape of a mouth and the shine of both eyes. It had my nose, not exactly, but enough to be horrifying, enough to make my stomach drop through the floor. Its expression was not angry. It looked almost relieved, as though it had been waiting a long time for me to notice it. When the light hit it, the thing pulled back so fast it vanished from view, and at the same moment, the booth door slammed open from the outside. Cold air rushed in. The lights flickered once, twice, and then came back on. The lane was empty. The bridge was empty. The radio was dead silent. For a moment, I could only stand there gripping the flashlight and staring at the open door, because I knew with every part of me that if I looked down at the chair behind me, I would see something sitting in it. I did not want to know whether that feeling was fear or memory. Outside, the suspension cables gave one long groan that sounded almost human. And then everything went still. I called my supervisor from the landline at 4:11 a.m. and told him the toll booth needed maintenance because I could not make myself say anything else over the phone. He came out in person at sunrise with the morning crew and checked the lane, the cameras, the lock, and the control box. The booth window was closed again when they arrived. The bowls still sat on the counter. The black thread was gone. No one found any sign of a vehicle on the bridge after the maintenance truck left, and the footage from the hour between 2 and 4 showed only me sitting at my desk, getting up once to check the window, and then standing motionless for nearly 3 minutes with my back to the camera. On the recording, my mouth moved during those 3 minutes, but there was no sound. The supervisor asked me what I had been doing, and I lied because I was already too frightened to tell the truth. I said I had been tired and probably talking to myself. He let it go, at least officially. I quit 2 days later. The part that keeps me from sleeping is not the footage or the voice, or even the face in the glass. It is what I found when I emptied my locker at the end of that week. Wedged inside the seam of my jacket was a small coil of black thread tied into a perfect little bow. It was still damp. I had not put it there, and nobody else had access to the locker except me. I threw the jacket away, but the thread never left my mind. I've driven past Ravenhollow Bridge only once since then, in broad daylight with my brother in the passenger seat, and even then I could not bring myself to look at the toll booth. My brother said he saw nothing unusual, just an old structure over a river. I believe him. That is what makes it worse. Because sometimes when I pass any bridge at night and catch my reflection in the window, I still cannot help checking the seat beside me to make sure it is empty.